Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Brandywine Angler. This is going to be a little bit of a different type of thing than what I usually post. It's about fishing, and I hope you'll appreciate it in the spirit in which I prepared it. A number of years ago, my father and I were on Nantucket Island at the same time as his sister, my Aunt Anne. My father and I made the trip together as an homage to the days of my youth when we used to visit Nantucket each summer as a family. The busy days of my 20s with law school, followed by my early years as an associate at a large city law firm, had kept me from Nantucket for too long. And that visit was a deliberate effort to spend some increasingly rare time with my father in a place we both loved. That my Aunt Anne was there as well on this occasion was a happy accident, although she also shared our love of Nantucket and owned a house on the island that she visited as often as life allowed. A longtime member of the Women's Fly Fisher Club, Anne counted fishing among her many passions, but Anne had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease a number of years earlier, and over the ensuing period had suffered the steady degradation of bodily control that comes with Parkinson's, which remains to this day a disease without any cure. By the time of this particular mutual visit to Nantucket, Anne had not been fishing for several years. On this occasion, though, Anne was enjoying a respite from her more severe symptoms. My dad, himself an avid angler, announced that we should take Anne out on the family boat for a fishing trip. With her brother's energetic encouragement, Anne declared that she was willing to give it a shot. However, there was only a very small window of opportunity for the trip, only a few hours in fact, because a tropical storm, the remnants of what had been a very powerful hurricane, was approaching the island and was due to arrive later that day. Anne's consent secured, my father and I quickly loaded the rods and tackle on the family's old 17-foot Boston whaler. It was an early 1970s Montauk, which was kept on a mooring in Nantucket Harbor. We then gently beached the boat so Anne could board, which was a complicated process due to her Parkinson's condition. Once Anne was safely on board, my father took the helm, his sister seated close by his side on the helm bench. We eased through the harbor, cut through the familiar hole in the North Jetty, and blasted out across an eerily calm Nantucket Sound, bound for the rip off of Great Point, that long, slender peninsula of land on the northeastern corner of the island that helps give Nantucket its distinctive Nike swoosh-like shape. We were the only boat on the water that day. Most everyone else was busy either lashing down their boats from the coming storm or pulling them from the water to remove them from harm's way. As we raced across the sound towards Great Point, to our starboard, a large dark cloud loomed over the entire southern sky like a wave that was cresting, ready to break. The Great Point Rip is a world-famous fishing spot. At the tip of the slender, curving formation of sand and high dunes that is Great Point, the waters of the Atlantic run headlong into the contrary tides of Nantucket Sound over a shallow underwater sandbar that is an extension of the peninsula. The Rip's turbulent waters are full of marine life, with Mother Nature's food chain on full display. Shoals of small bait fish teeming in the abundant waters are pushed by the unrelenting tides into the chaotic chop of the Rip, where powerful game fish such as bluefish, striped bass, and bonita make easy meals of the disoriented bait. Larger predators like sharks and harbor seals can be seen on the margins of the Rip, stalking the game fish that hunt the helpless bait fish. Just above the crashing seas, ocean birds such as terns and seagulls wheel in great clouds above the feeding fish, looking for the opportunity to dive down and snatch wounded bait fish left struggling on the surface by the marauding game fish as they feast. For as far back into my youth as I can recall, Great Point Rip was always pure magic to me. And I was riding that familiar endorphin rush as we reached the rip and throttled down. Hoping the impending storm had inspired some of the bluefish who regularly inhabited the rip to feast before the storm, I prepared the rods. As we began to troll the rip edges, because of Anne's condition, casting, our preferred style of fishing, was just not an option. One of the outer bands of the hurricane started to push through, bringing with it a freshening wind and some sprinkles of rain, as well as the realization that we had far less time to fish than I thought. The decision to bring my aunt fishing, or even go out at all, suddenly seemed quite impetuous and even downright foolish. Within a few minutes, one of the rods bowed with the weight of a take. With my heart racing like I was 10 years old again, I pulled the rod from its holder, ensured there was a solid hookup, and handed it over to Anne, who had moved to the stern-facing bench to better fight the fish. For about 5 minutes, Anne battled the fish, the heavy chop of the rip, and her Parkinson's, before easing the feisty bluefish, a standard issue 4 or 5 pounder, alongside the gunnel. I grabbed the leader, flipped the fish into the boat, unhooked it, and handed it to her for a moment of celebration, followed by a quick release back into the churning waters. Even as it happened, that was a special moment for me. Anne was so pleased to have landed that fish, perhaps all the more because she had been able to share the experience with her brother and nephew. Despite our many times together on Nantucket, it was the first time the three of us had been fishing together. As it happened, it was also the last. In what had been only a few moments of fishing, the weather conditions had already deteriorated noticeably. We all agreed that, our mission accomplished, it was time to head for home. I took the wheel while Dad got Anne situated in one of the 2 seats in front of the helm and settled himself into the other. As they sat in front of me, talking in the intimate way that siblings can, I turned the boat towards the harbor and eased into the throttle, the bow starting to pound against the rows of waves that the freshening wind was blowing directly at us across the open expanse of the Sound. With the wind steadily rising, the waves mounding up, the rain increasing, and our visibility vanishing, the return trip was also quite memorable. What on the way out had been a 20-minute jaunt at wide open throttle over slick seas became an hour-long ordeal, pounding through the angry water at half and even quarter throttle, racing the arriving storm while trying to keep the ride as tolerable as possible for us, especially Anne. At times, I was honestly concerned that we might not make it. When we reached the relatively calmer waters in the lee of Cotu and emerged into the harbor through the North Jetty passage hole, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Throughout the return trip, my father and Anne were strangely calm. At the time, I attributed it to the wisdom of their age and experience, which gave me some reassurance that we would make it home safely despite the situation. Now, thinking back, I wonder if it was perhaps simply the peace they found in that moment, a brother and a sister sharing the bittersweet joy and sorrow of what they both knew would likely be Anne's last fish. My Aunt Anne passed away last week at the age of 88 after a full and wonderful life. She left me with many fond memories, including the day she joined my father and me to throw caution to the wind, race a storm across the sea, and chase the pure joy of feeling a fish on the end of the line.